Imagine a winter so long it feels like the year has only one season. A winter where the air can burn your fingertips in minutes, where your breath turns into crystals, where a parked car can become a frozen block in a few hours, where even your phone can lose the fight and shut down, not because it is old, but because the cold is simply too strong. Now here's the question. If life is this difficult, why does anyone stay? Why build a village here? Why raise children here? Why keep a community alive when nature seems to push back against every basic human habit? Today, we're traveling to one of the most extreme inhabited places on Earth. A remote settlement in Siberia, reached by flying east from Moscow, passing through Yakutsk, and then continuing by road until the landscape becomes quieter and the cold becomes more absolute. This is Oymyakon, often described as one of the coldest permanently inhabited places on the planet. Oymyakon is not a winter destination. It is a living village with families, routines, traditions, animals, and a daily reality built around one central truth. Here, comfort is not guaranteed. So in this documentary, we're not only going to ask, how cold is it? We're going to ask the better questions. What does cold do to a human community? How do people keep water, heat, food, and transportation working when the ground itself is frozen over? And what does it teach us about adaptation when you have no choice but to adapt? As you listen, keep asking yourself, what would you change first in your own life if winter lasted 8 months or more? Let's open the case file. Part 1, Arrival at the Edge, the village that looks empty from above. From above, a place like Oymyakon can look almost abandoned. A handful of buildings, a thin road, a landscape that feels like it could swallow sound. And that leads to a question. Have you ever looked at a place and assumed nobody could live there simply because it looks too harsh? In many parts of Siberia, winter dominates the calendar for most of the year. In this region, freezing temperatures can last at least 8 months. And when you step outside in deep winter, it can feel like you've landed on another planet. Not because the buildings are strange, because the air is different. Cold here is not just a temperature. It is a force that changes how the world behaves. Plastic becomes brittle. Metal becomes painful to touch. Moisture turns to ice so quickly you can watch it happen. Even time feels different. In extreme cold, the outdoors becomes a place you visit only with a reason. You move fast. You plan ahead. You do not wander. So let's ground this with scale. Oymyakon is small. A village community of roughly hundreds of people spread over a limited area. And yet, even with a small population, what you're seeing is not endless. It is strategy. When survival is hard, you don't waste energy on movement you don't need. So here's a question for you. If every minute outside had a cost, would you still take casual walks? Would you still do errands the way you do now? In Oymyakon, cold trains the entire community to think differently. And the first thing you notice is this. The village is built on frozen ground, not just winter frozen. Part 2, Permafrost and Heat, Why Warmth Cannot Pause. Oymyakon sits on permafrost, ground that remains frozen year-round, with frozen layers that can extend hundreds of meters deep. That single fact changes everything, because when the soil is permanently frozen, many normal systems become difficult or impossible. Water pipes can freeze, sewage systems can fail, foundations can shift if heat melts the ground unevenly. So the village depends on a lifeline that cannot stop. Heat. A central heating system sends hot water through pipes from a boiler station, often powered by coal or other fuel, to homes and buildings. And here comes the question that outsiders often miss. What happens if the heat stops even briefly? In a mild climate, a power outage is inconvenient. In Oymyakon, it can become a serious emergency. Because in extreme cold, if a heating system fails, indoor temperatures can drop quickly. Pipes can freeze. Water can turn solid. Even the structure of daily life can collapse. That's why the heating system must run continuously. Not most of the time, not during the day. continuously. So let me ask you, have you ever lived in a place where your home depends on a system that cannot be turned off, even for an hour? In Oymyakon, heat is not a comfort product. It is not a luxury. Heat is infrastructure. Heat is survival, and it shapes how homes are used. People often create buffer spaces, rooms, or entry areas that are colder than the main living space. These spaces can act like shields against the outside air, reducing heat loss when doors open. It's an architectural idea that seems simple, but it reveals something important. The village is not trying to defeat the cold. It is trying to manage it. That's the pattern you will keep seeing again and again. And once you understand that pattern, even the daily routine makes more sense. Part 3, living in deep winter, darkness, calories, and the energy problem. A day in Oymyakon often begins early, even when the sun rises. In deep winter, daylight may not arrive until around mid-morning. But life doesn't wait for sunlight.
I think we should get these too.
People wake up in darkness.
Okay, and I'll
They
take this
move
pasta.
through routine by memory. They start fires, check heat, prepare food, and get ready for work and chores while the windows still look like night. So here's a question. What would your morning feel like if you had to function for hours before sunrise? Every day, through months of winter. Now we get to one of the most practical realities of life in extreme cold. Food. In cold environments, your body burns energy to stay warm. Even standing still, your body is working. Heat is constantly leaking through skin and breath. Your metabolism becomes part of the survival system. That's why breakfast in places like this often focuses on high-calorie foods. Not because people are trying to eat heavy, because they need fuel. Foods that are rich in fat and energy can help the body maintain warmth over time. They take longer to digest, releasing energy gradually. And that leads to another question. Have you ever eaten not for taste, but for endurance? In many modern lives, food is choice, variety, preference. In Oymyakon, food is planning. It's the difference between feeling stable or feeling drained. It's also connected to the reality that fresh fruits and vegetables are hard to produce locally. The ground is frozen year-round. The growing season is extremely short. Transportation is difficult and expensive. So many families rely on what can be stored, preserved, transported, or produced through animal husbandry. Which leads us to a major truth. In extreme environments, diet is shaped by geography, not trends. And if you've ever wondered why some northern communities eat more meat, fish, and fat than people in warmer climates, this is a big part of the answer. The cold is not just outside. The cold is inside your mouth. Your daily energy budget becomes part of survival. Part 4, water and sanitation. When turning on a tap is not an option. Now we come to one of the most challenging parts of life on permafrost. Water. In many modern cities, water is invisible. You turn a handle. It appears. It disappears down a drain. So let me ask you, when was the last time you truly thought about water? In places like Oymyakon, water is never invisible. Because permafrost makes plumbing difficult. Pipes can freeze quickly. Maintenance is hard. And even if you install water lines, keeping them functional in extreme cold becomes a constant battle. So many families rely on an older solution. Ice. In winter, the river becomes a frozen landscape. And people cut blocks of ice and bring them home. Not for art, for drinking, for cooking, for brushing teeth, for basic hygiene. Think about that. A modern home, a warm living room, a family breakfast, and the water begins as a block of ice. So here's the question. How would your daily routine change if you had to physically collect water before you could use it? Ice blocks can be stored outside or in cold storage spaces. When needed, a block is brought in and melted slowly in a container to produce usable water. And because the surface can be contaminated by handling or dust, people often scrape away the outer layer before melting. This process isn't dramatic for locals. It's normal, but it reveals something big. Water becomes logistics, and sanitation becomes different too. Without a modern sewage system, many homes cannot rely on indoor bathrooms the way city apartments do. Basic facilities may be outside, in small structures in the yard. So imagine this. It is minus 50. You need to go outside for basic needs. You dress quickly. You move fast. You return fast. Not because you want to be tough, because exposure costs. So let me ask you, could you stay calm in a life where even a bathroom trip requires preparation? This is where outsiders often misunderstand the story. They hear coldest village and they imagine only suffering. But the real story is adaptation. Systems. And those systems do not stop at heat and water. They extend into the heart of how people survive economically. Animals. Part 5. Animals and survival. Milk, meat, fur, and the living economy. In places where agriculture is limited, animals become essential. They provide meat, milk, hides, and sometimes transportation. In Oymyakon and surrounding regions, people raise animals like Yakut horses and cattle, adapted, managed, and protected because animal health is tied directly to human survival. Here's the question. What happens to a village when its animals fail? In environments like this, animals are not extra. They are the foundation of food security. But caring for animals in extreme cold comes with unusual challenges. Even basic physiology becomes a concern. Farmers take steps to protect vulnerable parts of animals from frostbite. They keep animals as safe as possible while still managing the realities of feeding, watering, and cleaning in a climate that freezes everything. And then there's water again. In some cases, animals must be brought to water sources even in deep winter. But how is that possible? Everything is frozen. Here's one of the strangest and most fascinating details. Some river sections do not freeze completely, often because underground spring water mixes with the river and keeps parts of it flowing. That creates places where animals can drink. But even that is dangerous. Animals must move quickly. They cannot linger in wet weather, and people must manage the time. So ask yourself, can you imagine a daily routine where your livestock has to drink from a freezing river, and timing matters because water can turn to ice on contact? Now let's talk about the Yakut horse. These horses are famously adapted to cold. They are generally shorter and stockier than many horse breeds, with thick coats and strong bodies suited for endurance in harsh climates. And here's a question. Why would being smaller help in extreme cold? A compact body can reduce heat loss by distributing warmth over a smaller surface area. The thick coat and strong physiology help them endure temperatures that would be dangerous for many other animals. These horses can live outdoors through winter conditions that seem impossible to outsiders. And in this region, horse meat is also part of the diet, often described as rich, fatty, and nutrient-dense. Now, this is an important point to say respectfully and clearly. Food choices
in the
are
deep
cultural
freeze, every breath is a
They are
testament
shaped
to their
by
resilience.
history, survival
The Aberdeen
needs,
Angus,
and what the land can
built
provide.
for survival.
So instead of judging from far away, ask a better question. If fresh vegetables were rare and expensive, and winter was most of the year, what foods would your community rely on? This is why hunting and fishing also play major roles across Siberia. Not only for food, but for culture, for identity, for community. And nowhere is that more visible than on the ice. Part 6, ice fishing, transport, and technology. Living where machines can fail. In many northern regions, winter turns water into land. Rivers and lakes freeze thick enough to travel and work on. And that leads to one of the most iconic images of Siberian winter life. Ice fishing. But let's ask the obvious question. How do you fish when the water is under more than a meter of ice? You cut, you drill, you use tools designed to break through thick frozen layers. And you rely on experience to pick the right spot. Because in winter fishing, location is everything. Fishermen may look for riverbends, stream junctions, or familiar fishing grounds remembered from past years. They listen to subtle sounds
A
beneath
trout
ice.
placed on snow
They read the
immediately
landscape
freezes.
like a map.
A thin frost
And the
skin
catch
forms
freezes
across it.
immediately.
The world
In
is
deep
the
cold,
freezer.
food doesn't need a freezer. The world is the freezer. Now let's talk about a famous northern tradition. Stroganini. Thin slices of frozen fish eaten raw. This isn't a dare. It's a cultural practice linked to climate and history. And here's a question. Did you know that in regions with limited sunlight, certain nutrients become especially valuable? In the far north, people have long relied on fish and animal foods, not just for calories, but for nutrients that help the body function during long winters. Now we shift to transportation. In a place like Oymyakon, vehicles are not optional. They are often the difference between mobility and isolation. But vehicles face the same enemy everything else does. Cold. Engines struggle. Oil thickens. Batteries weaken. Rubber hardens. Fuel can behave differently. And here is one of the most surprising realities. Some people avoid turning off their engines in extreme cold. They let the car run. Not because they love wasting fuel, because restarting later might be impossible without special heating tools. So let me ask you, what does it say about a climate when leaving a car off for an hour can turn into a mechanical crisis? People use engine heaters, insulated covers, and sometimes powerful external heating devices to warm components before starting. If someone has a heated garage, it changes everything, but not everyone does. So the village adapts again. And then there is technology. Phones, cameras, batteries. These can fail quickly in extreme cold. So locals keep devices close to the body, inside inner pockets, using body heat as protection. And that brings us to a bigger question. How dependent are we on technology? And how quickly would modern life feel fragile if our devices could not survive the environment? In Oymyakon, people live with that fragility daily. They plan around failure. They build redundancy. They treat technology like another tool that needs warmth to function. And now, after heat, water, food, animals, transport, and tech, we reach the final layer of this documentary.
Endurance
The mindset,
is psychological
because in the
as
end,
much as physical.
The cold is not only OUTRO, the lesson of Oymyakon, survival as a culture of systems. So what is Oymyakon really? It's not just the coldest village. It's a living demonstration of how humans adapt when nature refuses to compromise. People here survive through systems. A heating network that cannot pause. Water collected as ice and melted into life. Food chosen for energy and endurance. Animals protected because animal health equals human stability. Travel planned because mistakes in cold become expensive. Technology managed because batteries are not stronger than Siberian winter. And routines built to reduce risk day after day. And now, let me ask you a question that matters beyond this village. If your comfort disappeared, no instant water, no easy heating, no reliable devices, what would you still know how to do? Could you keep yourself warm without panic? Could you plan for the worst without feeling defeated? Could you build a routine that protects you? Because one of the most surprising things about extreme places like Oymyakon is this. People do not survive by being dramatic. They survive by being consistent. They survive by respecting reality. And many communities also carry beliefs, rituals, and traditions that help them endure psychologically. Ways of making sense of a world that feel unforgiving. Not as denial, but as balance, as meaning. So here are the final questions I want to leave you with. What part of life in Oymyakon surprised you the most? Would you choose to live here if your family history was rooted in this land? And do you think modern convenience has made us stronger or simply more dependent? If you want the next documentary case file from Siberia, ice roads, winter schools, daily life in Yakutsk, or the reality of remote villages, leave a comment with the word Siberia and tell me which story you want next. Thanks for watching.